Alright, welcome back to the Supercoach Nuff channel. In this video, we're going to look at the NFL fantasy and just review some of the different draft formats and draft strategies that are available. So, I guess a lot of people that haven't played NFL fantasy before, might think of it as very similar to like an NRL Supercoach or NRL fantasy rather style draft. And while there certainly is the case where that happens, there is actually other formats which I believe are more exciting and more entertaining. And I guess, if you're looking to try out one of these um, formats have a play around and get involved. So, excuse me. um, but yeah, in terms of the draft types that are available, I guess the most common type of draft that you'll see, and again, this is the one that's very similar to NRL Supercoach, NRL Fantasy, is what we call a redraft league. So, redraft league is basically all the players are available, and you go through generally in what we call a snake fashion. So, the snake draft, how it works is the first person obviously picks first, and so on all the way to the end. And then in the second round, the person who picked last gets to pick first again. So, the idea being it's supposed to balance out that the first person that gets the first pick gets the last pick in the next round, so that the teams, in theory, should be potentially more even. You can also do a linear draft where it's just the draft order is the same for every round, but obviously that creates a massive advantage for people who get to pick first or in the earlier part of the round. There is some more advanced ones like third round reverse, and it sort of starts linear and then goes to snake. But yeah, I guess the most common one is the redraft snake league, um, and they are good because they're nice and simple, and there is lots of information out there about those sorts of leagues. But I find because there is so much information out there, they do become quite formulaic, and basically, if you get a certain pick, you can already work out what your team's going to roughly look like. So it's good and bad, but definitely one if you just want to get in nice and simple. That's probably the one for you. Some variations of those style of drafts, the snake draft and linear draft, is dynasty and keeper. So dynasty is, I guess, starts off like a redraft league, but then once you've drafted, that's your team for years to come. So the next year, you don't redraft, you just start with the team that you finished with at the end of last year. Keeper leagues are sort of like a hybrid between the two. So instead of keeping all of your players, you keep maybe 2 to 5 players, depending on the settings of your league. Everyone else goes back in and you redraft for those other players that are available. So these leagues are good because, I guess, first of all, once you get a team you're happy with, you get to keep it. You don't have to try and re-pick them the next year. And it also is an opportunity to draft some of the younger players because obviously, especially in like a dynasty league, they're going to stay in your team for a lot longer. So, you know, those are more interesting if you're looking to play over a number of years. Um, so probably once you've established a league and you guys are pretty comfortable with your teams and that sort of thing, that's something you could potentially transition into. The next type of league or league draft, and this one's probably my favourite one. This is the one that I sort of most actively participate in. Is called salary cap or auction draft. So it's somewhat similar to Supercoach in that you pay for players to come into your team. Um, I guess the difference is that like a draft league, obviously only one draft player, I should say, can own each NFL player. Excuse me, got a really dry throat at the moment. So I suppose the reason why I do enjoy this so much is because you can get the team that you want. As I said, snake drafts in like redraft formats in particular are very formulaic. Like the top picks going to be usually 1 or 4 or 5 players, and then if you say your first pick, you get to pick who you want, but then you pretty much know the next 20 players you're not going to be able to get access to. With the salary cap, You've got so much money to spend. If you want to spend it all on two or three of the best players in the league, you're more than welcome to. It doesn't leave you with much money for what's left over. But at least then you can match up. So, like, you could get, say, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, or you could get Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler, those sort of setups. So, for that reason, it's more exciting. As well, like I said, the snake draft's very formulaic, but the auctions I find are quite chaotic, particularly when there's a few people targeting the same person. And then your potential strategy can go out the window very quickly. Another type of draft that's probably more popular in America is best ball drafts, and so essentially this is where you pick a squad of players before the season starts, and then you don't have to actually put a team in week to week. What it'll do is it'll calculate the best score from your squad, and that is your score for the week. So there's a lot of content at the moment around best ball drafts because a lot of the, I guess, quote unquote experts, they like to go in, do lots of drafts, build lots of teams, and then in this best ball format, they don't have to sit there and, check updates and injuries for 700 teams or however many they do. They just set and forget. The computer calculates it all, and then they get their results at the end of the season. So if that's something that you wanted to look at, if you're a bit time poor during the season, best ball draft might be for you. The last type of draft that I was going to talk about, or yeah, the last draft type, is a guillotine league, and this is a really intriguing one for me. I haven't tried it yet. Maybe if we can get some interest in this sort of league, we might even be able to put one together somehow. But essentially, how it works is there's 18 weeks in the season, so you start off with 18 players, and essentially every week, whoever scores the lowest, their team gets cut. So, like a guillotine, cut the head off it, and their players all go back into the free agency pool. So, you can imagine as you go through the season and more teams are getting cut, the teams that are left are getting stronger and stronger with those players that are available. So, that'd be a really interesting one, I think, too. Obviously, the downside is if you're unlucky and miss out in one of the earlier weeks, then you don't have anything to do for the rest of the season. But I think, it'd still be interesting to watch one play out and see how it goes. The last one there, just talk about Fab. So, Fab isn't a draft type as such, it's more about how you determine the free agents and who gets priority of them. So, generally, every week when the round's finished and opens up to what's called the waiver wire. And essentially, it's where teams can go in and pick up any players that aren't already drafted to other teams. So, for example, if you have an injury or a suspension, perhaps, you can get a player off the waiver wire that's available to fill in that spot in your team. And generally, it's worked off the reverse order of the ladder. So essentially, if you're bottom of the ladder, you get first pick on the waiver wire. So it's trying to make it so that players at the bottom can get a chance to move themselves up. But an alternative is this idea of FAB. So it stands for free agent budget. So it's again like a salary cap for your free agencies. So if a free agent comes on the market, even if you're top of the ladder, if you're willing to pay the extra money, you can draft in that free agent. So again, it adds an extra bit of strategy and skill to the game, and yeah, it's something that we're trying out in our league this year, which will be very interesting. Particularly because I'm a big fan of working the waiver wire and trying to snap up good free agents as they come up. So yeah, so as you can see, there's lots of different types. As I said, I'm a massive fan of the salary cap auction style. Um, and in fact, I have gone ahead and set up a league in the ESPN fantasy football. So I know when I first introduced it, I was showing the NFLfantasy.com, the official NFL fantasy, but our league that I'm in with a couple of mates that I work with, we've gone to ESPN just for drafting purposes, really. So I thought, well, rather than trying to navigate two different platforms, I'll bring the Supercoach Nuts draft over to ESPN. So the details should be down in the comment section below. I'll try to pump it up at the end of the video as well. But yeah, if you're interested or just want to have a go, get on board. We'll obviously go through the basics of how it works. I'll do some mock drafts as well in the coming sort of days and weeks so that you can see, and then we'll try to even maybe do the live auction, have a go at live streaming it. I think so. So yeah, so I'll just pump that up while I'm talking about draft types, but I'll go again at the end, and we'll move on to the scoring. So in terms of scoring, there's probably two main types. You've got standard scoring and PPR. So PPR stands for points per reception. So essentially, with standard scoring, the number of receptions that a person catches, so like from a pass from a quarterback, it doesn't matter. It's purely down to the distance that you make on the play. PPR, you do get an extra point for the reception. So a lot of people like the PPR because it brings in more running backs and a few more of the shorter yardage wide receivers. Not just the ones that are hauling ass downfield to catch the long balls. Um, so yeah, obviously in the middle you've got half PPR, so you get half a point per reception. So some people like to play that because it balances it out even further. So those players that get the advantage in PPR and the players that get the advantage in standard brought a bit closer together. You can also have some premium type scoring. So tight end premium is a prime example of that. Generally, tight ends are the lowest scoring players, mostly because their role does involve a bit more blocking and the like, rather than actually catching and making big meters. It's not to say that all tight ends are like that. There's definitely some high scoring tight ends that you can get, but tight end premium just boosts up that position so that it makes them a bit more interesting to bring in as options in your squad. And you can have custom scoring as well. So some leagues you'll get 6 points for every pass touchdown. Some they reduce it back to four so that the quarterback's not overpowered, that sort of thing. Um, you can set up the leagues however you want. I think the standard is 6 points per touchdown for that, for example. Um, but yeah, again, you set it up how you want, and then obviously the adjustment in scoring needs to be accounted for when you draft your side. I guess another thing to go through just quickly is the actual positions that are available in your draft. Um, so I guess the four or five standard ones, I suppose, they're at the top. You've got your QB or your quarterback. I'm pretty sure everyone knows the quarterback position. It's the player who passes the ball, essentially runs the team. They're the high profile guys. Generally, they are also the highest scoring if you look on a per position basis. But given most NFL drafts, fantasy drafts, I should say, only require one quarterback, and there's so many that do score quite well, they're usually actually a lower priority. You're better off trying to get running backs and wide receivers. And then obviously when you can get a quarterback whenever it best suits your team and your setup. Um, Running backs, so they're the players that I guess traditionally have been most valued in NFL fantasy because they often get to run the ball, so they have plenty of opportunities to make meters. Um, they also do some catching of passes as well, so particularly in PPR, you want those running backs that catch passes as well as just run the ball. Um, Actually, I should have gone back to quarterback because I talked about quarterbacks do score a lot of points. Um, the quarterbacks that probably score the most are what we call the mobile quarterbacks. So they're the ones that not only pass but they also run the ball as well. So the likes of Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson are probably the big three. You could probably throw Justin Fields in there as well, as he loves to run the ball a lot too. So you've got those guys, and then you've obviously got ones like Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow that are really just relying on their passing volume. They do have a little bit of mobility, about them because I guess most quarterbacks have had to establish that in their game, but they definitely don't, sort of look to that avenue all too often. So just keeping that in mind as well as you're drafting is, you do have those more mobile players do have more upside because they also run the ball. So we've talked about quarterbacks and running backs. So wide receivers. So essentially, these are the guys that are the ones catching passes. They don't usually get the ball off the line of scrimmage, I suppose. But as the game evolves, NFL and NFL fantasy, uh, teams are relying more and more on these wide receivers. And you've got some studs like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Cup that just get a lot of targets in their team, which means they get a lot of points, particularly in PPR format because they get the ball, they're already fair way up the field, and then they continue to make yards or meters from there. So more and more, there's people targeting wide receivers earlier in drafts. We'll talk about some of those different strategies in this video, and I guess try and go into some detail in the coming videos. But yeah, wide receivers are an important part of your team. Tight end we did touch on previously when we talked about the scoring format. So tight end is a player that sort of starts tight to the line of scrimmage. Um, so they're what's called an eligible receiver, so they can catch passes and therefore get receptions and yards for those receptions. But depending on the team, some teams use them more for just blocking. Some teams do rely on them more as a passing target. So again, it's probably traditionally the lowest valued of the four positions or the four main positions. But there is some studs like Travis Kelsey, for example, who are he matches up with pretty much any wide receiver just because of the amount of targets that he gets. You then have the flex position. So flex is basically a utility type player. It can be a running back, a wide receiver, or a tight end. So generally, I guess if you're just playing a standard league, you'll have one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, one tight end, and one flex position. So you can put a running back, a wide receiver, even a tight end if you want in that position, and obviously hope they score points. There's also super flex. So super flex is the same as a flex, but you can also have a QB. So when you have a quarterback, or sorry, a league that has a super flex or even has two or more quarterbacks, suddenly that lifts the value of all the quarterbacks because if someone can grab the top two quarterbacks and you grab two of the lesser quarterbacks, the difference in scoring can be quite impacted. So so if you are playing a super flex or a two QB start league, definitely put quarterbacks as that higher priority. Um, Also, depending on your league, you might have a defense and special teams position. So essentially, you pick one team's defense, and by special teams, that's your kick returns and punt returns and those sorts of things. Um, and obviously, if they scored, I was going to say tries, scored touchdowns from interceptions and sacks and things like that, um, you get points for that also. You might also have a kicker, so they're the ones that kick the field goals. So essentially, whenever they kick a field goal, you get points for that. And then in some leagues, you have IDP, which stands for individual defensive position. So we've obviously listed off a lot of our attacking positions. Um, in fantasy football, that's usually what it's about. But in some more advanced type or expert type leagues, they do actually pick individual defensive players, so whether they're linebackers or safeties, maybe even defensive linemen for sacks. I'm not 100% sure. I've never played it before. And I don't really intend to either. It's hard enough keeping up with 32 offensive lineups without worrying about the defensive lineups as well. So yeah, so those are all the different positions. Again, like I said, the standard is one quarterback, two wide receivers, two running backs, one tight end, one flex. But you can obviously adjust your league to whatever you want. As I said, there's two quarterback leagues. The main league I play in, we play one quarterback, but we do have a super flex. We also have two flex positions, so that's just you've got to start. I think it works out to be 9 players plus a defense, special teams, and a kicker, so actually 11. And then you usually get bench spots as well, so that can be anywhere from 5 to as many as you want. I think we run with 8. We're running 8 on the bench this year, so pretty deep sort of squad. Um, we only have 10 teams as well, so it sort of works out to be about the same number of drafters, players drafted, I should say. Um, but yeah, just you can make it to whatever you want. So in terms of some of the draft strategies that are popular, and as I said, I'll try and do some videos that highlight these particular drafts. We'll do some mock drafts, and as these come up, we'll talk about them. But I guess common ones that you might hear are things like hero RB or zero RB. You might even hear double RB perhaps from time to time. I should have added that in actually. And essentially, this is based on how many running backs you pick early in your draft. So some people like to pick one of the gun running backs, so like a McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan Robinson this year is being considered a potential hero RB. So, you pick these guys and then you don't worry. Even if you're playing two running backs, your second one can be, a bit of a flyer pick on someone that you think might score well but is, being drafted late. And then, you try to build the rest of your team around that so you don't stress about having two gun running backs. Zero RB is taking that a step further where you don't even worry about having one good running back. You try to stack up the other positions, particularly wide receiver, and get the advantage there. And then obviously you try and get the running backs that are going to do you a job a bit later in your draft. Double RB is obviously getting the two of them and locking them in because traditionally running backs do score the most. Um, Out of them or wide receivers, but the meta is shifting towards wide receivers being just as good at scoring, but also more reliable in terms of not getting injured. In terms of quarterback, again, you've got hero quarterback or zero quarterback, and this is just about whether you want one of the premiums. So the top three are usually Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts. So you might really want to target one of them early, and people are targeting them as early as the second round. It seems like in this year's drafts. So you may want to go ahead and do that. You may just want to go zero QB, and particularly if you're only playing in a one QB league, you might be happy to wait and get someone lower, like an Anthony Richardson perhaps, or a Tua Tagovailoa, um, and try and stack up your other positions around that. The last one, and this is probably more relevant to the salary cap or auction just because of the way that it works. But I've heard it called a couple of different things: studs and duds, stars and scrubs. We probably in Supercoach call it guns and rookies, essentially. So you spend most of your money on those gun players that are going to score you lots of points, and then with your leftover budget, which usually isn't very much, you try to fill in with players that are going to do a job for you and could potentially score some points. But yeah, that one's obviously more salary cap, so we'll discuss that one when we do a salary cap mock draft in the coming weeks. But yeah, just wanted to finish off with some common tips, and across all the different formats and all of the different strategies and different position allocations. It can be a lot of different strategies, but I think the common ones that you hear a lot of, regardless of draft, is about first of all trying to pick the best available option. So if you're not sure who to pick or you don't have a strong preference, literally just go for the best available player. And particularly, in the early rounds, so like rounds 1 and 2 of your snake drafts and that sort of thing, um, you know, don't necessarily get too bogged down into, I have to be double RB or hero RB. If the two best options are both wide receivers, you might say, well, I'm going to take them and maybe go a zero RB strategy. Um, Yeah, so if you get too bogged down in a strategy, you might not get the best options, and then obviously that will filter down through the rest of your draft as everyone else picks up those better players around you. As much as possible, pick from the top of the tiers. So essentially, a lot of the information you will see online and stuff, because you never really know who's going to be the best or the next best player, except for maybe Travis Kelce at tight end. uh, generally players get put into tiers. So, like I said, the top three quarterbacks: Pat Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen. People might have them in the same tier. So, as much as possible, if you get to the stage where you're like, well, these guys are the best available, I'm going to pick from there. Um, Generally, if a couple of those guys are gone, people will panic and be like, "Oh, I need to get Hurts because Allen and Mahomes are gone." But sometimes there's more value in looking at, okay, well, what's the next tier down? Oh, it's a tier of wide receivers. I'm going to get the best wide receiver, and that'll get me ahead of people in that position instead. So just something to consider. Obviously, if you're playing for the first time, that's a bit more of an advanced thing. I know I've only been playing for a couple of years, and it's something I haven't really paid too much attention to. I'm going to have a look at it this year just to see if that strategy does pay off. But yeah, it's more of an advanced maneuver. Another one you'll hear a lot is the RB dead zone. So essentially, they say that any running back that you pick in the round sort of 3 to 6 or thereabouts usually don't work out to be the value. And whether that's true or not remains to be seen year on year. It seems to be just a common theme. However, with so many wide receivers going early now, some of those running backs are dropping down into that quote unquote dead zone. So you can actually still get some value in there. Um, but, that's the common advice. I'm just sharing it with you guys. Like I said, I'm not an expert. So, if you want to get that hero running back, make sure you get them in the first 2 rounds. All right, if not, you just wait, zero RB it, and then you don't go until about round 7 to 10 is the general guide with that. But again, it's your team. You play it how you like. Um, Another one is about picking for upside in the late rounds. So, once you've sort of filled out your main team, they're going to be your players that play most weeks anyway, barring injuries, suspensions, all that sort of stuff. So with your late round picks or the players that are probably going to sit on your bench, it's always nice to try and pick for upside. So particularly with things like wide receivers, you'll see the rookies, they'll build their way into the season. So if you get them on your bench, they might start slow, but then, if injuries come up, that sort of thing, they'll get more time on the field, they'll get more receptions, get more points, and then you look like a genius. So try to go for those upside flyer picks in the late rounds rather than just like, oh, this guy will play every week and get me 5, 6 points. Get someone that might only score 2 or 3 points in the first few weeks, but by the end of the season could be up around 15, 20 points a week. And the last one is just try to leave the kickers and defensive teams until the end. Some people, will be in a rush to draft their team, and then they're like, oh, I've still got to fill in the kicker and defensive team spots, and they'll do that before they fill their bench. So, as much as possible, I'd recommend filling your bench with running backs and wide receivers. Maybe a spare quarterback is handy. Spare tight end is debatable. Depending on the number in your league, it might be worthwhile not even worrying about that. But then your last two picks, if you need to, pick the defensive team first and then the kicker with the very last pick. Or even if you don't necessarily have to pick in your draft, I'd still pick another wide receiver and running back, or, two of those. Um, and even if you don't have a full team after your draft, you can always trade and do stuff later. But if you have those extra running back, wide receiver assets that can be used as trade pieces, you might actually get a nice player. You might be able to take two of those two extra trades, trade them up for a better player, and then you've got a spot free to pick a defense or a kicker. So again, it depends on your league setup. Some leagues you have to draft a full team. some you don't. So just be mindful of that as well. But yeah, I believe that wraps up the video. It does. I'll just go back because the black screen's not nice to look at. um, and yeah, as always, if you've got any comments or questions, like I said, I know there's a lot of people that probably aren't too familiar with this. Feel free to throw them in the comment section below. Again, have a look in the description. I will add the code in there for the league that I've set up. I probably wasn't smart enough to put it on this presentation notes, but I will try to do that in future. But yeah, if you are enjoying the NFL fantasy content, remember like the video, subscribe to the channel, and other than that, I'll catch you in the next one.